Hello, guys. Welcome back to the Think and Nick podcast. We are back on this lovely Sunday morning, the 23rd of January, and I'm joined by Nicola. How are you?
Hello, I'm great. Thanks, Nick. And hi, Carel.
Morning, Nicola.
Fantastic. Okay, so we have another guest on today's episode, and we're really excited to get chatting with him about unlocking international boundaries. Someone who I've known for a very long time. We both schooled together in the Midlands in South Africa, where we were fortunate enough to attend Michael House. Our guest is skilled in leadership, communication, innovation, problem solving, sustainability, construction technology, health and safety, and well-being. He has a strong appreciation for program and project management, backed by a Bachelor of Science honors degree, specializing in construction management from the University of Cape Town. He has international experience across 3 continents with Mace Construction, starting in Johannesburg, South Africa, and then moved to the UK, where he continued his career in construction management. After missing out on an opportunity in New Zealand, he now finds himself living and furthering and continuing his career in construction here in Vietnam. Carel, welcome to the pod.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks for having me.
Fantastic. So let's kick off this podcast by asking, what does it mean to go abroad? And in my view, to go abroad means basically to leave the country that you are native to. But there's a difference between going abroad to just travel, like hopping on a plane and going to another country to see some family for a week or two, and actually working in that country. Now, what this podcast is going to focus on is actually working abroad. So, Nicola, would you like to give us some insight on what it's like to work abroad?
Sure. I guess it's different for different people. I was fortunate enough to work in South Africa, the West Indies, and the US, and then came back to South Africa. Other countries that I've worked in have been sort of in and out for different clients, and that's probably only about 20 different countries. So if we focus on the first side, that's about, like you said, leaving behind your native or leaving behind your known identity and fitting in and forming part of a community, probably with a different set of culture, values, priorities, and lifestyles to the one you're used to. I can only imagine how different it would be living in Cape Town versus living in Vietnam. That for me was quite different, living in the UK and living in the West Indies, which is actually an island. Very different.
Yeah.
And then there's the working abroad, where you might go in and out for a project, where you might have a flat for a while, or you might stay in a hotel. That's still working abroad. It still sort of has a similar experience and leaves a dent. And then there's going abroad, which is something you might do with a backpack, a tent, your family, etc. It's probably 3 different experiences, actually.
Fantastic. Thank you, Nicola. So, Carel, how did your journey start abroad?
Yeah, thanks, Nick. I just want to start off by saying it's great to be on the podcast and to support a friend that I've known for a long time. It's a fantastic opportunity to come here this morning and share. And I'm very excited to get into this topic. And to kick off, my journey abroad started when I was afforded the opportunity to go on exchange at Michael House, the high school that we both attended in South Africa. And why this was significant was I was immersed into a different culture, a different country, a different community where I lived and I studied and I attended school for 6 months to 8 month period. And I was really there, the penny dropped in terms of what it's like to actually live and experience another culture and dive into what sort of lifestyles they live, what sort of communities they've formed, the habits and the routines that they have. And really that experience opened my mind and got me excited about, how big the planet is and what all the opportunities and things there are out there to explore. So really at a young age of 16, that was an incredible opportunity and a great privilege to go and attend countries such as America, where I was in Nashville, Tennessee. I went to a prestigious school there called Montgomery Bell that other my class pupils had been to. And so I was part of this American family. And I lived an American lifestyle for 6 to 8 months, which completely transformed my small and young and developing brain. And that's really where my international journey started.
Okay. It's actually, it's interesting that you say that, because like you, obviously I finished the year before you, but like you, I went to England for a year and I also lived with a family, an English family. And I had not a similar experience, because obviously we're in different countries, but it's relatable, because I also got a sense of what it's like to live abroad, look after yourself from a really young age, be independent. And then obviously coming back to South Africa to study, I did all my studying there in South Africa. And then I think because of that gap year abroad, I think I was a bit by the travel bug and being able to work overseas and have that opportunity. So I think that's why after I finished studying, I wanted to move along and not stay in South Africa and actually come over here to Vietnam, where I find myself now here for 5 years.
Yeah, absolutely. I think
Wow.
at that young age to live in a different country, it almost feels like there's a different sense of freedom. There's at that young teenage where you're kind of rebellious and you want to explore new things. You don't want to be confined by home and that sort of traditional sense of still having to grow up. Being abroad, it kind of gives you that freedom to expand and grow as a person and develop your personality, because you're in a completely new environment. People don't know who you are, so you can kind of formulate your own personality and you can establish your character more readily. So
yeah, I agree. Nicola, what do you think? What is your view on starting to work abroad from a young age?
I think it comes down to human perception. If you've never experienced something in life, it's incredibly difficult to perceive it. And I learned this once working with, it was a newly appointed politician. And he'd come out of a fairly rural part of South Africa, and we were doing a thinking skills program. And as part of the exercise, I gave the group a jigsaw puzzle to do. And it was a particular exercise, which if you turned all the pieces over, you could have done it faster than looking at the picture. It was only about 30 pieces, but there was a trick to doing it. So one group finished it really quickly, and the other group was looking at the picture. So it was almost like doing the opposite of what you were used to. And I looked at this one chap, and he was just staring at this thing. So I walked over to him and I said, "Do you know what that is?" And he said, "No." And he said, "I've never seen one before." So I explained what it was and where you can find them and which shops you find them in and how it's kind of routinely done in education. And then I spoke to Edward de Bono and I asked him his opinion. And I said, "What's actually happening here?" And Edward said, "If you haven't experienced something before, you cannot perceive it." And there are huge amounts of benefits to having a broad perception in life, because that allows you to reduce conflict, see other people's points of view, cohabit without getting too stressed about things have to be this way. We become much more accepting, worldly individuals when we have a broader perception. So I think one of the things that travel does in all of its guises is it actually helps us to broaden our perception. You get to see poverty in a different way in Vietnam to the assumption of how you think it is in South Africa. Same for India or South America. Poverty exists all over the world, but your view of it is different.
Yeah, I definitely agree there, because poverty here in Vietnam is, there's poverty all over the world, like you said, but here in Vietnam, I find that the people here, there's less crime, there's less violence, and that could be a cultural thing, that could be a religious belief thing, but the poverty here is there, it's rife, but the way that people act as a result of poverty is very different. Now, Carel, given your experience from working abroad at a young age, how has it opened your eyes to unlocking international boundaries?
yeah, I think it's fantastic that you introduced the topic of perspective and how we perceive things, Nicola, because that was kind of one of my main points and one of my main trains of thinking in opening up this topic. So traveling and having worked across 4 different continents, I kind of noticed myself building an extensive bank of knowledge and experiences. And that bank of knowledge and experiences formed a particular perspective. And as I started to learn and observe and experience new things abroad that were not familiar to my home country or native territory, I started to feel empowered by that knowledge, and sharing that knowledge with other people, or having that upper hand in situations where something might come up. For example, as you said, when the person turned over the card, they weren't familiar with it, and I was. in certain circumstances.
Mhm.
That was a great benefit that I experienced from traveling and working abroad. And developing that perspective, my spectrum of understanding and level of thinking was being elevated. And I learned a significant amount about how different people and places are, the way that they work, and started to compare and contrast and understand why it was different like that. And so that bank of knowledge really for me was wealth and something that I could employ in the workplace. And that's where exchange and traveling abroad kind of worked to my advantage in looking for a job and working abroad. So
Absolutely. Yeah, I definitely, and if we, sort of shift the focus to opportunities here in Vietnam, these developing countries, especially here in Vietnam, everywhere you look, there's an opportunity to do something. Like, I have a number of friends who have all started businesses here in Vietnam, and they've actually taken business models from other countries and just implemented them here. But because it's a developing country, and it's developing very fast, as you would know with maize, these people have, got thriving businesses now, and they've just taken something from another country, brought it over here, and now, it's a way of life here. Nicola, what's your view on that?
Well, I think when I listen to the experience piece and actually getting abroad and the exchange piece, the first thing that came to my mind was getting abroad is also part of the challenge. So here we've got two very privileged young men who've been to a fantastic school, who have the means to get there. So there's the means and the mission and the motivation, if you like. So the means is, do you have the resources to get on a plane, to buy yourself a visa, if that's what you need, and actually make the trip? There's then like the mission. It's like, I'm going to do this no matter what. And it can be quite a daunting thing if you've never been overseas, to just get on a plane and go into this absolute unknown territory. And then there's the motivation, is that once you get there, it motivates you to want to explore and do more. What's very interesting economically is the impact that these experiences have on skills for an economy. So it's almost as if, as a country, you want everybody to experience another country, because it does all the things that you've said. It broadens your perception. It allows you to bring that knowledge. It's extremely empowering. And then you've got the challenge of, please don't leave and go away when you're young, because you might not never come back when you're old. And in certain countries, particularly South Africa, where you've got a skill shortage, you want to repatriate skills. So if you have people that go away, you want them to come back and bring all that knowledge with them. And there's lots of people that go, I'm going overseas, and then that's it. You don't just change where you live, you change identity. And that can even happen in a country. So you can move from the south to the north, or the east to the west, from New York to Los Angeles, or from London to Edinburgh, and you engulf the identity of your new place of habitate, you habit somewhere. And with that comes all the habits of that culture. It's almost like a double-edged sword. It's fantastic because it makes you perhaps a more, I wouldn't say well-rounded, but a more empowered individual. And then there's always like this knock-on effect of like, no, don't leave. We need you back here to open a business and run a shop, be with your family.
There certainly is a great element of challenge in moving overseas or moving abroad and establishing a new life there. And as you said earlier, it's completely different from traveling and visiting a place temporarily as a tourist, because you're not exposed to the challenges of having to find your routine and normality in these international environments or these foreign cultures.
Yeah.
And so when you move to a new country to work there, it's a very thrilling but also a very daunting challenge, as you have to set up and find your new routines and ways. And certainly we've both experienced coming to Vietnam, which is a very different country culturally. And I was very fortunate to have had Nick here prior to me, because he was the first person that I'd contacted and asked for some insights. And I think that's a very important comfort to have had someone that's established here already, and slowly but surely. But everyone goes on their own journey and trying to find their routines, because it's everything from where's your local coffee shop, where the laundry services, where do you buy your groceries, the small menial things that you skip past on a day-to-day basis start to become more of a challenge. And all of that while you're attending a new job and trying to find your feet. So it's
networking is a big thing, and we are very fortunate to have the network that we have, But just talking about identity, a great example of that here in Vietnam would be the rugby club. So we're in a foreign country in Asia. I don't think there's one Vietnamese guy in the rugby club anymore because he moved overseas. So the rugby club is just full with foreigners. By the way, we would love to have more Vietnamese rugby players, so please do come down. But it's just full of foreigners, and I find myself
plug the geckos.
Yeah, plug the geckos, definitely. Okay, come down to the geckos. I find myself literally, immersed in all these different cultures. We got French, we got New Zealand, and we've spoken about this in the podcast with Alex on leadership. But I find myself, not just saying brew, for example. Now I'm saying mate, I'm saying all these different words, and I feel like I have a complete different identity to what I had back in South Africa, for sure. Okay, so
that's quite fun.
Carel, the Think and Nick podcast is basically, we want to add value to people who are not quite sure of their next step in life. And we just want to give them as much information as we can, because I feel like I am sort of in that position. So what insights could you provide to people who are in this sort of phase in life, given your experience?
So traveling abroad and seeing the world and finding these opportunities is fundamentally dependent on having the resources to do so, as Nicola touched on. And I think it is pertinent to mention at this stage of the conversation the privilege and the resources that we have had. And I think that is a major stepping stone in being able to go and take on these opportunities abroad. But at the same time, I don't think that these restrictions should feel like they're hindering people in going for these opportunities abroad. I think having the resources available to go abroad. So what I would say to people is that you need to build your profile and your CV that is attractive to international countries. So having traveled abroad when I was younger and having those experiences, that already gave me a foot up in what international companies were looking for. And so I'd say to people that you need to look at what these international companies are looking for and align yourself with qualifications and experiences that you can sell to these companies, because ultimately these companies are looking to send people abroad that are going to be able to take on the challenge and help them establish a foothold in these foreign cultures. And I think South African people in particular, coming from a background of complex and diverse cultures, are well equipped to work in these foreign countries, because for a long time we've been focusing on and establishing a comfort level and an understanding for different cultures. And so I particularly feel like the experiences that I've had growing up in South Africa, studying in universities with diverse racial cultures and compositions, has equipped me well for working in these foreign countries, because of the mindset that I have and the way that I approach these cultures and these different ways of life and these different beliefs and religions. So having worked in Vietnam now and having to control and manage a foreign workforce, I'm already familiar with the approach that I would take to establish a good rapport with them, how to first consider what they believe and the ways and means that they are comfortable with before I apply a management principle to them. Yeah. So I think, just to summarize, the first thing is, don't be put off by the limitations of resources, financially especially. I would say there's still a great opportunity to position yourself by building your CV, building your profile, and then look for the opportunities abroad. Look for companies that are willing to sponsor and put you in touch with the right people that can send you abroad to unlock these international boundaries.
Yeah. So Nicola, obviously you hire people for your company, and touching on, building your profile and your CV and your experience. What is your take on what Carel has just said?
I think, cross-cultural leadership, management or leadership is key. And I think the thing I've most picked up on is your willingness to learn about another culture before imposing your own set of leadership values. And I think that can only be a good thing. I mean, imagine if we could get that right in life in general. Let me learn about you before I impose my own leadership rules and boundaries. And that implies a level of flexibility and understanding, which I think is an indication of, high emotional maturity and intelligence. So working now in Vietnam, and obviously, Nick, you've been there for 5 years, but now if you shift all of that experience to the UK, it's not necessarily going to work. If you shift all of that experience to New Zealand, it's not necessarily going to work. And even though America and England speak a similar language called English, the cultural differences between those two regions, if you take Australia, South Africa, and America, there's a lot of similarities, but there's also a huge amount of differences. And so you can't impose your set of values and leadership styles on another culture until you've actually invested the time and energy to understand it. And I can only imagine how different that must be in the East, so to speak.
Yeah.
Yeah, as you said, it's not necessarily a direct application of learned experiences. It's more of development of the skill set to employ and learning how to approach and deal with and recognize. Because in those experiences working in those countries, although, as you said, the UK, New Zealand, and Vietnam would be very different culturally, it's still the skill set and practicing those skill sets that enable you to be more effective working internationally.
Yeah. So now we've touched on the culture, and having to understand the culture before, immersing your values and getting stuck in with work. So now let's sort of shift the focus to project management. So Carel, given your experience with managing different projects in vastly different areas, 3 different continents, what are the key lessons or learnings when it comes to project management across these different areas?
Yeah, I think that's a great topic to discuss, and I do recognize that project management is a very widely employed term, and you find various different applications of project management. And I think construction project management that I practice in and that I'm qualified in is a very niche market of project management. But I would say that one of the main lessons that I've learned is respect, and respect kind of starts the journey off with the right mindset. So approaching a new culture, a new work environment in a new country with respect kind of sets the tone. And I look to develop an in-depth understanding first before deciding how to implement and move forward. So asking questions, putting yourself out there, having an open mindset, being vulnerable with new cultures and people, being willing to compromise and adapt. These are all valuable characteristics and skills. And working abroad and traveling builds resilience. So as we spoke about earlier, the challenges of settling in a new country and having to overcome these challenges and become comfortable with them, that builds resilience. And resilience is a massive lesson and a quality that you need to establish to be successful working abroad. And learning how to read and understand people. These people are led by their beliefs and their experiences and their cultures. So it's important as a project manager to understand what is driving their decisions, what is behind their mindsets and their approaches, instead of just arriving there and thinking, this is what I've practiced previously in the UK, so this is what we need to implement here. These people are vastly different. Their skill sets are vastly different. In the UK, you have welders that are certified by degree, by institution. And in Vietnam, you have welders that are certified by experience. They've been welding since they could stand and hold a welding rod. And so understanding that this person might not necessarily have the paperwork and the qualification, they might be even more skilled by practice and by having learned through experience than the welder, the equivalent welder in the UK. And so you do have to adapt your mindset and your approach in managing these projects. But project management is fundamentally built on the principles of establishing control and then arranging and organizing and integrating multiple moving parts to achieve the objective of the investor or client. And so in that sense, it's very important as a project manager to be able to interpret and understand these various moving parts before you integrate them. And finding the best way to integrate them is is very much related to reading people and reading cultures and reading these diverse backgrounds. And that's when you start to see the true colors of really project managers and their skill set, and how effective they are at bringing these diverse backgrounds together. And that certainly is something that these international companies, especially in construction, look for when they employ construction managers to work abroad.
Okay. So Nicola, obviously you work with both global and, national organizations. Can you just touch on what Carel was saying?
Yeah, so I mean, if I'm going to go from projects and then I'm going to go back to people. So any kind of project is about time, quality, and cost. So you deliver a project on time to a certain standard and within a certain budget: time, quality, cost. And the thinking around projects is you can do it fast, but it might cost you more if you want that standard. You can do it fast, you can have a low budget, but you're probably going to compromise on quality. And if you want quality, it's going to cost you and it might take more time. So those are sort of the fundamentals of project management. And what often is studied when you learn about project management is how do you organize the parts to achieve a successful result for your stakeholder, whoever's funding your project probably, or the beneficiary. But then what Carel started talking about was people and how you're learning about cultures. So fundamentally, the box at the bottom of that triangle of time, quality, cost is probably a big box that says human beings. And the trick is, how do you get human beings on a project to become human doings? Because I can guarantee you, if Carel has a snag list on a project, 95% of that snag list is not the product, it's how it was executed. It's the person.
Absolutely. The workmanship.
There you
Absolutely.
go. So ultimately, I think what all this sort of international exposure does for us is it helps us learn more about human beings. And it's the ability to influence and guide and lead, not control, which is what project management is. Because if you put too many controls on people, we almost inherently rebel. It's like putting us in a prison. We want to break out of the bars. So control, which is the essence of management, isn't necessarily the system you use to drive great human behavior. Because nobody wants to feel controlled. If I'm going to come and control you, I can almost guarantee you, being South African, there'll be resistance.
Yeah.
But if I influence you, if I can lead you, inspire you to do good work, if I can guide you, teach you, grow you, if you feel like a better person because you've come to work, then what you've got is the opportunity to get your human beings to be great human doings, which means you're much more likely to deliver on time, quality, and cost. But I want to come back to a question to Carel, is you mentioned the word resilience. So I want to understand for you, what is resilience? What do you think it is in your world?
And Mace as a company is quite big on resilience, and we do mention it in a lot of our business strategies and objectives. For me, resilience is the ability to absorb change and the ability to overcome challenges readily with the skill sets that you have fortified yourself with, which is directly applicable to the experiences that I've had in Vietnam. I've been here for 3 years and I've worked on 3 projects, and the construction industry here is very vulnerable, and you have to be versatile in adapting to these changes that are happening, because it's still a young and developing country. A young and developing country that's still finding its construction laws, that's still finding its control of this bustling industry that's coming up very fast. And so you see that these projects that you work on, they don't have the history and experience that projects in first world countries like the UK are built on. And so you have to be readily able to adapt and absorb these challenges and these compromises that you're faced with. And so for me, resilience is really being able to absorb those uncertain and unexpected environments and to drive forward.
Cool.
A bit of that.
Yeah, awesome. Just to summarize before I let you guys go, basically, if you are looking to go abroad, and work, we definitely recommend it. Here is living proof of two individuals who have done it. And you know what? If it doesn't go your way, that's totally okay. You can always fall back on, where you came from. So thank you very much, Carel, for that insight on project management and coming on the show. We really appreciate it. We appreciate your time.
Thank you, Nick. It's been a great privilege and honor to experience this podcast with you and to share. Thank you, Nicola, for your time and valuable input. It's fantastic
Thanks,
to
Carel.
support a great friend, and this podcast is doing wonderful things. So I wish you all the best.
Thanks, Matt. Appreciate it. Nicola, thank you very much as always. Have a great
Thank
weekend,
you.
and we will see you next week.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Nick, and lovely to meet you, Carel. Good luck in
All right.
Vietnam. Yeah, cheers,
Bye.
guys. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
For more news and content about Think and Nick, go to www.thinkandnick.com or visit our Facebook or Instagram pages @Think and Nick.